if I want to. I'll get to the thanks in just a second. I want to begin with a little story. I first landed in New Delhi in the winter of 1989, almost 35 years ago. Seeking to understand this large and to me very foreign city, I did what I always do when I headed for a bookstore. I understand, you see, by reading. Entering that bookstore, I fell into the world in which I live. The India of bookstores stacked floor to ceiling with books, most of them in English. The India of novel readers. The India in which a certain class of people, like me, like some of you, narrate themselves in an English that it is once foreign to them and is the language in which they are at home, in which they make sense of their lives. The language in which they, I, are both insiders and outsiders. I make sense of my life through fiction, most of it in English. I also make sense of India, its culture, its society, and politics through its fiction in English. Being in language, in fiction, being a perennial outsider, insider, might be a strange way to live one's life, but it makes sense to me, and it is essential to my scholarship. It helps also that I have a community that gets it. So I want to thank everyone so much, but I'm going to limit myself. I want to thank you for the speakers who, especially in the case of Eitan and Yali and Rotem, their imprint is in the book almost in every page of it, and I want to thank you so much, and also being there with me as I was writing, but also for your
pages exactly.
It's not how it works. So I want to thank you also for your comments, and also for Itamar, sort of a latecomer to this group of my friends, also known as the best minds of my generation, and for your amazing comments, which, as you will see, have really sort of set the stage for what I'm going to say in just a few minutes. So thank you also very much. I want to thank the English department and my colleagues in the English department, undoubtedly the best, most collegial, funny, and best department ever. I want to thank Maurice and Alex and Hila and Ruba and Josefa, who sort of originated it, for organizing this wonderful event, my party. I want to thank my wonderful family and friends who trekked out here all the way up to the Mount of the Carmel to celebrate me and my book, and finally to you, my students, who, as you know, because I've said this many times before, make everything matter. I thank you all from the bottom of my heart, and also want to say, once again, onwards and upwards. And now, I want to say a few words about what I learned while writing the book, and as a sort of response to many of the things that you read, not to say repeating many of the things that you've already said. So in June 1975, as we all by now know, Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi imposed a state of emergency in India. Lasting 20 months, the period was swiftly relegated to the status of anomaly in India's democratic history, all but forgotten for a while in public and academic discourse, although not significantly from literary fiction. Why, I wondered when I understood this, did these novels return to the emergency long after it had ended and was ostensibly forgotten? I have spent the last 10 years of my life reading deeply into these novels, their content, what they said, their form, how they said it, and their context. the historical context. Examining each of these aspects closely and then again through each other creates a denseness which enables the stereoscopic view that I think Eitan was talking about. Those are the tools of my lab. That's a little shout out to my lab friends in the back. The tools of my back: form, content, and context. I came up with various answers of why emergency, why long after it had ended. But overall, I argue it was because these novels, the writers, realized that rather than just an anomalous one-off crisis, the emergency was also of a piece with India's past and laid the groundwork for its future, our present. Crisis and continuity. So while scholarship depends on keeping our eye firmly on the object of our study, for me, the emergency and its novels inevitably and importantly has another context, that of our own place and time. During the last 10 years I spent reading the Indian emergency, I, like most of us in this room, was also living through another series of emergencies and crises that have too become chronic. Indeed, the last stages of writing genres of emergency coincided, as you all know, with the COVID-19 pandemic. Writing under lockdown at home, the connections between my research and my surroundings became fast and strong. Refracted in the pandemic emergency, it became clearer in my study that emergencies worldwide are not just similar to past emergencies, but they're also constructed on a template of emergency, a structure within which an emergency could be comprehended despite its ostensible singularity, as many of you already explained. In other words, emergencies are unprecedented, but need to be recognizably unprecedented. My work on genre helped me understand the ways in which this almost automatic recognition of emergency or crisis served to make it politically neutral, easily harnessed by opposite ends of the political spectrum, and more cogently to blur the differences between these poles, as Autumn has shown. As I wrote the concluding lines to my book, the pandemic, then 2 years old, had become the new normal. Would it have an actual end, we wondered? And if it did, would we recognize it? Imbricated in each other, historical and political genres abound. Events fade in and out of view, at times as crisis, at others as continuity. Hovering above all of these, I have tried to argue here, is the genre of emergency, where the unprecedented meets the always already, in the struggle to make sense of the senseless, in the fear of normalizing that which should not be normalized. So I couldn't end this day, just like all the four of our speakers, without saying a few words about the political and constitutional crisis in which we are embroiled today and here. In our current crisis, we have an authoritative regime announcing itself not as a state of emergency, but proudly as the new normal. We're here to stay. The rhetoric of emergency is instead being wielded by the opposition, I'll call us we, who are mobilizing our resistance under the sign of emergency. This is where I think that we should be paying attention, reading our own rhetoric of emergency suspiciously. This is not to say that there is no constitutional crisis, nor that we shouldn't make any effort to resist it. I most emphatically think that we should. But in our focus on this crisis, we first need to question our own investment in regarding this moment as a crisis and as an emergency. Then to also take seriously the ways in which this moment is not a crisis, but a continuity. Let's take, and again, Itamar and Rotem have shown beautifully how this works. Let's take, so I'm going to give another example. The unexpected symbol of this emergency, the Israeli flag and the Declaration of Independence, which have come to symbolize, in a PR stroke of genius, I have to admit, the desire to return to Israel's core values of democracy. But we might want to ask ourselves, what kind of Israeli polity is being imagined through these tropes? If we are arguing for a return to democracy, what does this mean for those for whom this has never been and continues not to be a democracy? Who is part of the we that is created by our sense of democracy, and who is not part of this we? Moreover, what might we be normalizing while we are resisting? What have we compromised and normalized thus far in each consecutive moment of historical crisis in the name of emergency? How are we also contributing to the very ritual we are resisting, to the long-standing and escalating continuities that have enabled this very real and dangerous emergency? Experts on the rise of authoritarian regimes in Poland and Hungary, as well as political scientists, have repeatedly stressed that appealing to the most common denominator and blurring ideological difference is the key to a successful protest movement. To be pragmatic, they argue, we must avoid divisiveness and instead stress neutral, ostensibly apolitical, neither left nor right values such as democracy or rule of law. This was also true in India, where a large anti-Indira Gandhi coalition, the Janata movement, uniting left and right, finally managed to topple her regime. Here, the Israeli flag and the Declaration of Independence, ensuring the Jewishness of the state on the one hand and its commitment to democratic values on the other, democratic values and the protection of minorities on the other, symbolize this depoliticized, ostensibly neutral ideology of democracy. However, unlike what we might learn from Hungary and Poland, the lesson learned from the opposition to the emergency in India is, I argue, the opposite. The depoliticization engendered by the emergency served to legitimize the most fringe elements of the fundamentalist Hindu right, some of those in power today. In other words, depoliticization is not the antidote to the rise of authoritarian, anti-democratic right, but a condition of it. Alongside a wide protest, depoliticization also creates an ideological vacuum, a vacuum that is filled by the right and creates further and enables further erosion of democracy. And so, my biggest fear at this moment in time is that when the ostensibly wide, politically neutral coalition protesting against the government will be successful, and I kind of think it will be successful, and it will restore the democracy signified by the flag and the Declaration of Independence, this will be a Pyrrhic victory, one which will further normalize a democracy that is not democratic, increasing the violence for those not privileged to come in under its protection, and narrowing the ranks of the privileged. None of us are free until all of us are free. It's a truism, but it is also very true. Solidarity, as my friend Sakit says, is the glue of democracy. After 10 years of scholarly immersion in the Indian emergency and personal emergency in a string of crises of various magnitude, I feel I have earned the right to say, authoritatively, this is for my narrative theory class today, authoritatively, that we must highlight ideological difference rather than blur them. We must insist on the uncomfortable truth that we cannot, in the name of democracy, compromise on democracy for everyone, and we must fight for it as if our lives, all of our lives, depend on it. because I really think they do. Thank you.